The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character. The manager's face drained of color so fast it looked almost unreal. His fingers trembled as he reached for the phone sitting on his desk. I watched him glance toward the woman seated beside him, the company's lawyer. That single look made my stomach drop like an elevator with a broken cable. They had brought me into this quiet conference room about 20 minutes earlier. Now both of them looked like they were preparing to call the police. "Miss Grace," the manager said carefully, measuring every word, "you need to understand how serious this situation is. This policy is currently active. The payout amount is roughly $4,200,000. The air left my lungs. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even think. $4,200,000. All of it tied to a single insurance document my sister had tossed into a garbage can just 4 days ago. But there's a complication," he continued. His voice dropped a little. "For the past 4 years, someone has repeatedly tried to take this policy away from you." He placed a thick folder on the table between us. Opening it slowly, he turned a page and pointed to a signature line on a rejected form. The line was circled with red ink. "Do you recognize this name?" The name printed there read, "Megan." "My sister, my own sister. Leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would really like to know who is in our community." I kept staring at the red marks on the page, but I didn't cry, I didn't gasp. In the world I lived in, a world filled with climate-controlled archives and centuries-old books, emotions were just background noise. What mattered was the record, the evidence, the data. And the data sitting in front of me told a clear story of betrayal I had been far too logical to notice. The manager, his name tag read Robert, was watching me closely. He clearly expected me to fall apart. He thought the number $4,200,000 would break me. What he didn't know was that for 31 years, I had quietly carried the cost of my family's carefully staged illusion. I had been the one paying for their lies while keeping myself invisible in the background. My sister had laughed at this policy. She had called it a pile of moldy trash. At the funeral reception, she tossed it into a garbage can beside a tray of half-eaten shrimp, laughing loudly for the benefit of her 450,000 followers online. "Grace, stop hoarding useless junk and start thinking about the future," she had said. It turned out the future had been written in tiny print she was too arrogant to read. "My name is Grace, and I work as a professional archivist. My job is to uncover truth buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten paper. My entire life has been spent being invisible, the quiet daughter who studied the fine print while my sister stood in the spotlight. My family believed my obsession with details meant something was wrong with me. They called me paranoid, difficult, overly serious. I simply call it keeping track of the numbers. And today, for the first time, the math was finally correcting itself. I looked at the lawyer. Her name was Sarah. She stood out sharply against the gray fog covering the streets of San Francisco outside the window. Everything about her, from her posture to her expensive suit, looked precise and unbreakable. "You said someone attempted to change the policy 9 times, I said calmly. My voice sounded like a medical report. "Show me the dates." Robert hesitated briefly, then slid another folder across the table. I studied the pages. What I saw wasn't just a list of names, it was a timeline. A carefully planned attempt at theft. Every attempt was another effort my sister had made to borrow money against my life, and my mother's name appeared on the documents too. She had signed as a witness. I felt a strange, cold alertness move through my body. This wasn't a tragic family misunderstanding. It was a takeover. They assumed I was weak because I spoke so little. They assumed that because I avoided attention, I didn't notice when they quietly shut off the lights around me. But invisibility has advantages. When people believe you're unimportant, they stop hiding things from you. You learn how to watch the people who believe no one is watching. I remembered my sister's eyes at the funeral. She wasn't mourning, she was calculating the value of the silverware, the worth of the house, the price of the wine. She believed she had removed me from the story completely. But my grandmother, Martha, had been a librarian long before she became wealthy. She understood something most people never learn. The most important parts of any story are usually hidden in the margins. She left me a trail of paper, and that trail had led directly to this room. She knew I would follow it. I was the only one who would. The manager's phone finally connected with the legal department. I noticed his reflection in the window glass. The thick San Francisco fog blurred the city behind him until everything looked ghost-like. He looked as if he had just seen one, and maybe he had. Because what he was seeing was the ghost of a woman who had spent 4 years protecting her granddaughter from the rest of her own family. I leaned back in the large leather chair. The silver necklace around my neck, a tiny book pendant, felt heavy against my chest. My grandmother had given it to me because she said I always searched for the truth. This moment wasn't a breakdown. It was a settlement. We'll need copies of everything, I told Sarah, including the rejected forms, especially those. I wasn't simply claiming an insurance policy. I was beginning a complete audit of every lie my family had ever told me, but every investigation has a starting point, a moment where the first mistake becomes visible. For me, that moment happened exactly 4 days ago. I was standing outside my grandmother's funeral in the cold San Francisco fog. Inside the funeral home, the air smelled like expensive flowers mixed with the damp chill drifting in from the bay. My mother looked flawless in her elegant black suit. Her posture was straight, her expression composed. Her eyes were perfectly dry. She wasn't mourning a parent, she was hosting an event. Beside her, my sister performed grief like a professional actress. She dabbed her eyes with a designer handkerchief while her other hand clutched her phone, recording emotional footage for her 450,000 followers. In their world, sadness was simply another form of online content. I stood quietly at the back of the room, like a shadow along the wall of my own family's life. That had been my role for 31 years. To them, I was just Grace, the dull girl who spent her days with books, about as interesting as a box of dusty papers. After the service, we returned to my grandmother's large house. My sister immediately began wandering through the study like a thief wearing designer clothes. She discovered my grandmother's old leather ledger, the one containing a detailed catalog of every rare book and historical document she had preserved over the years. My sister didn't see history. She saw clutter. Look at this moldy scrap paper, she scoffed. She tossed the heavy ledger into a large black trash bag. Grandma became such a hoarder at the end. We need to clean this junk out before I film my house tour. I watched the book land at the bottom of the bag, but I didn't move. I didn't argue. That was how I had learned to survive. Growing up in that house taught me very early that my voice carried no value to them. I had been expected to grow up quickly and quietly manage responsibilities so my sister could shine. It was a prison without bars. They only remembered I existed when they needed something. I remained silent, not because I was weak, but because I was thinking. Kindness had been a resource my family exhausted long ago, and now I was closing the account. I waited until they were in the kitchen arguing about which antique teacups would look best during my sister's live stream. Then I walked over to the trash bag. My hands were steady as I reached past funeral pamphlets and empty water bottles. I pulled the book out. It felt cold and smelled of old paper mixed with cleaning chemicals. That scent, old paper, was the only smell that had ever made me feel safe. I slipped the book into my bag. Inside the back cover, I knew there was a hidden compartment containing a small silver key. No one even noticed as I walked toward the door. Jane, I mean Grace, is always so sensible, my mother said casually to my sister. She didn't even bother correcting my name. She understands her place. She knows Grandma didn't leave her anything important. Yes, I knew my place. I was a professional archivist. People in my profession understand something most others overlook. The most valuable things are rarely the ones placed on display. They are the ones hidden in corners, waiting patiently for someone observant enough to discover them. My sister believed she had thrown away a list of old books. What she didn't realize was that she had just handed me the evidence of a $4,200,000 theft. Later that night, I locked myself inside my private workroom at the library. The air smelled faintly of electricity and the preservation chemicals we used to protect fragile documents from decay. Everything inside that room had a precise location. Before touching anything, I pulled on white cotton gloves. Under a strong examination lamp, every fragment of truth could eventually be proven. I didn't pour myself a drink to unwind after the exhausting day. Instead, I picked up a small metal tool and turned on my high-resolution scanner. My family thought I collected useless junk. They never understood that I specialized in reading the language of forgotten things. I placed my grandmother's leather ledger on the padded examination table. To anyone else, it was simply a catalog of books. To me, it was a map. I ran my fingers along the spine until I felt a slight irregularity, a raised bump where none should exist. Like a surgeon performing careful work, I opened the back lining and slid out a thin brass key hidden inside a narrow pocket. It was small, old, and somehow heavy with secrets. Next to the key were several lines of writing so tiny I had to magnify them 10 times to read them clearly. My grandmother had written them using a coded system. The same code she had taught me when I was 12 years old. She told me back then that the people who talked the loudest usually had the least to say. I turned the code into real words one by one. Account ending in 4402, restricted access, trust started in 1996. As I checked that account number against my own files, the fog in my head started to clear. For 15 years, my mother told me every time I bought a textbook that my school was wasting the family's money. She said she gave up her own retirement money just to keep me in college. But the book told a different story, a story with proof that no one could deny. That anonymous scholarship that paid for my classes, my room, and my training didn't come from a stranger. It came from my grandmother. She had put $650,000 into a closed trust just for my future. While my mother and my sister were acting like my life was a bad investment, I wasn't costing them anything. I was a prepaid asset. I sat back in my chair and the blue light from the computer screen hit my glasses. My kindness for them was a luxury they had used too much for decades. I rubbed my eyes. I tried to feel the regret my mother wanted me to feel, but I just felt clear. This wasn't a family fight. This was a checkup on 30 years of them stealing my emotions. My grandmother didn't leave that book in the trash because she was confused. She left it there to test me. She knew my sister would only see junk, but she knew I would see a trail of paper. I opened my laptop and started writing a formal letter to get the full money history of that 1996 trust. I didn't need to yell. I just needed to fill out the paperwork. I watched my phone screen as my sister's face popped up. She was using a bright ring light she had set up in my grandmother's old library. She was doing a live broadcast of the house for her 450,000 followers. In the background, my mother was already putting neon green tape on the old furniture. That color looked like a toxic spill in a room full of nice wood and leather. My sister picked up a very old book from the shelf and flipped the pages fast without caring. "Can you believe Grandma kept all this stuff?" she asked with a high-pitched laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "It's so musty. We're going to rip this whole room out and make a big room for my shoes. It's about time this house was actually worth something." My sister turned the camera toward my grandmother's empty chair. "And then there's my sister, Grace," she went on. Her voice sounded fake, like the way she talks to get more likes. "She actually tried to save a bag of trash at the funeral. Talk about living in the past. But I guess when you don't have any followers, you have to hold on to something on the screen. Heart icons and laughing faces moved by like a digital attack. My mother walked into the shot and wiped her forehead with a silk scarf. "Grace has always been difficult," my mother told the people watching. Her voice was cold and mean. "She doesn't have the vision to see that we are finally moving forward. She's lucky my daughter and I are here to take care of the real family business." I leaned back in my library chair while I watched them celebrate. They were drunk on a lie. They thought they had power because of a wallet they hadn't even opened yet. I saw then that their power was just a subscription they were paying for with money that wasn't legally theirs. My sister and my mother had a bad case of rented power. They acted like they owned the world, but their whole life was a stack of cards built on my grandmother's quietness. They weren't shocked that I saved the book. They were shocked that I finally stopped being a quiet piece of their family puzzle. My sister picked up a photo of my grandmother and me. It was the only one where I was actually smiling. "Total clutter," she whispered to the camera. She put it face down on the desk. My mother nodded. She was already figuring out the money she would make from selling the furniture. They thought they were winning because they had the house keys. They didn't know I had the keys to the $4,200,000 vault under their feet. I didn't write anything back in the chat. I didn't call to ask for the books. My anger wasn't loud. It was just a math problem. I simply opened my folder of proof and added a picture of the live stream to the evidence file. A different kind of fog was lifting inside me. I wasn't the other daughter waiting for them to like me anymore. I was the person auditing their downfall. I walked back into the private meeting room at the insurance office. My shoes made a clicking sound on the floor like a clock counting down to a judgment. The manager, Robert, was off the phone now. His face was the color of blank paper. Next to him, the lawyer Sarah sat with a pile of folders that showed how much my sister wanted to steal. For years, my family called me the Queen of Details like it was a joke. They thought I had a small mind because I liked to check facts and read the tiny words on papers. They were about to find out that when $4,200,000 is on the line, the person who reads the fine print is the one in charge. I didn't wait for them to say anything. I opened my own folder, which I had spent the last 48 hours working on in the quiet library. I pushed a high-quality scan across the table. It was a chart comparing the 9 signatures my sister tried to fake to look like my grandmother. Under my library's special software, the mistakes weren't just easy to see, they were obvious. The slant on the 1996 trust change is wrong by 12 degrees, I said. My voice was as flat as a math book. The pen pressure on the insurance change from 3 years ago doesn't match my grandmother's weak grip. And then there is the notary stamp. I stopped and watched Robert lean in. Kevin, the notary my sister used, had his license taken away last month for being a fraud. My sister didn't just try to steal money, she tried to mess with a public record. The manager looked at the lawyer, then back at me. Miss Grace, our legal department has checked the lock your grandmother put on this policy 16 months before she died, he said. His voice was very quiet. The tries to change the beneficiary to your sister were caught by our system, but we were waiting for someone to file a claim so we could start a criminal case. I asked Robert why they didn't just call my grandmother to check. His face got tight. We tried Miss Grace 9 times, but your mother filed a power of attorney for health and money. She claimed your grandmother was too mentally weak to talk on the phone. She caught every letter we sent and sent our calls to her own phone. It was a planned move. It was legal elder abuse meant to keep my grandmother quiet while they stole from her. I leaned back and felt a cold feeling of clarity. Then let's stop waiting. I am here to officially file the claim as the only real beneficiary of the $4,200,000 policy. And I have already told my own lawyers to start freezing the $650,000 trust count my mother has been using to pay for my sister's fancy trips. They thought I was the boring sister because I didn't post my life online. They thought that because I sat in the back of the room, I didn't see them stealing in the front. But being hard to see means you have a front row seat to the truth. Robert grabbed some official papers. His hands were finally steady. The claim is started, Miss Grace, and the criminal report for fraud and forgery is being sent to the prosecutor right now. My sister was probably still on social media, showing off our grandmother's stuff to her followers. She was busy acting out a life she couldn't afford, while I was busy auditing her out of existence. This wasn't about getting even, it was just fixing a long overdue bill. The lawyer Sarah pulled one last paper from the bottom of the pile. Her face looked almost respectful. There is one more thing your grandmother did, Miss Grace, she whispered. The $650,000 trust wasn't just a gift. It was a trap. My grandmother was a librarian who knew how much every comma mattered. She set up a living trust managed by a real law firm, not just a computer. She knew a computer could be ignored, but a lawyer with a job to do could not. The moment that 9th try was flagged as a fake, the law firm found out. As the main people in charge, they didn't just mark the account, they sent a criminal report for elder financial abuse to the district attorney. My grandmother had put in a legal dead man's switch. The 1996 trust had a special rule. The second my mother used a fake signature to take out more than $50,000 for my sister's expensive life, a high-priority alert was sent to the county prosecutor. My sister and my mother hadn't just been stealing. They had been reporting their own crimes for 4 years without even knowing it. I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt the click of a lock falling into place. This wasn't a family fight. It was a criminal case 30 years in the making. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't a text. It was a call from my sister. I put it on speaker. Her voice didn't sound like her. No fake influencer tone. No high-pitched laugh. It was raw and scared. "Grace, what did you do?" she screamed. The bank just froze everything. All my accounts. My credit cards didn't work at the store. Behind her, I could hear my mother breathing fast like she was panicking. "We just got a knock at the door, Grace," my sister sobbed. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow fear. "There are detectives here. They're talking about $4,200,000 in forgery. Please tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you said it was okay." The power had totally flipped. The woman who threw my grandmother's legacy in the trash was now begging me to save hers. I leaned into the phone. My voice was as cold as the fog outside. I didn't do anything, I said quietly. I just read the fine print. My mother's voice came through, sounding sharp with panic. Grace, honey, I'm your mother. You can't do this to us. Think about the family reputation. My kindness was a luxury they had used up for 31 years, and I was finally collecting the debt. The reputation you're worried about was built on stealing from a dying woman, I replied. The audit is finished, Mom. The balance is zero. I hung up and looked at the manager. Robert looked at me with a new kind of respect, the kind people give to something they just realized is dangerous. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, picking up my grandmother's book. Just as happens, the legal ending was fast and dry. My sister's online fame became her prison before she ever saw a jail cell. The same followers who liked her videos were the first ones to talk trash about her in the comments once the charges were public. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for forgery and insurance fraud. Her mother got 3 years for helping her steal. They had to sell the family house to pay back the money and the legal fees. They moved into a tiny apartment in a part of the city my sister would have never visited before. Their life was finally as boring as they used to say mine was. I used the $4,200,000 inheritance to start the Martha Legacy Library. We don't just keep books. We help people find the truths their families tried to hide. We find the mistakes. We read the fine print for old people and people who get ignored. Every morning I walk into that building and see my grandmother's original book in a glass case in the middle of the hall. It is a permanent reminder that even if you are thrown in the trash, you still have value. To those of you listening who have ever felt like the invisible child, the one who sits in the back while someone else gets the attention, I want you to know something. Being quiet is not a weakness. It is a time to watch. You are not boring. You are the one who sees the patterns. Everyone else is too loud to notice. The truth doesn't have to scream. It just needs someone with patience to find it. I sit on my balcony now watching the fog lift over the water, and for the first time it feels like freedom. I don't check their social media. I don't wait for them to say sorry. That would just be more noise. The case is closed. I opened my grandmother's old book one last time, looked at the numbers, and felt a stillness I hadn't known in 31 years. No guilt, no noise, just the truth. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to know that being the quiet one is their greatest strength. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about truth and justice.